Hi, I'm Michael James. Hit subscribe and let's dive into today's story.
I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in one of those stories. The kind you scroll through at 2 a.m. on Reddit, jaw clenched, whispering, no way, into the darkness. But here I am. My story begins in the most ordinary way, through a friend's dinner party. I was 31, career-focused, not really looking for love. But when Adam walked in, everything around me slowed. He wasn't flashy, not the kind of guy who turned heads instantly, but he carried himself with an easy confidence. He had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We ended up talking all night about travel, old movies, and books that had left dents in our souls. One thing that struck me was how much he seemed to value honesty. My ex used to lie about the smallest things, he said, shaking his head with quiet disgust. I'd rather hear a hard truth than a comfortable lie. I remember thinking, finally, someone who gets it. We started dating right after that. The first few months were a dream. He'd show up at my office with coffee, text me goodnight every evening, and planned thoughtful dates that showed he'd been listening all along. When I casually mentioned loving the beach, he whisked me away on a weekend trip 2 weeks later. He made me feel cherished, safe, and, this is important, seen. The trust built quickly, maybe too quickly. I found myself opening up about painful family history, old insecurities, even embarrassing financial mistakes. He took it all in without judgment. You're safe with me, he said once, his hand closing over mine across the table. Always. For a while, I believed him. The first red flag was small enough to dismiss. One night I noticed he kept his phone flipped upside down. He said it was so he wouldn't get distracted by notifications. It made sense. Then came the late-night texts he wouldn't explain. Work stuff, he said, waving it off. I wanted to trust him. Every relationship book and friend told me not to snoop, not to jump to conclusions, so I buried the uneasy feelings. But then little cracks appeared. He started working late more often. His once detailed stories about his day grew vague, like he was erasing details. When I'd ask about his coworkers, he'd shrug, you wouldn't know them anyway. Still, he was affectionate. He still kissed my forehead in the morning, still bought me flowers randomly, still made me feel like I was his person. The duality made me question my own instincts. Was I paranoid, or was something actually off? The breaking point came about a year into our relationship. One night he left his laptop open while he showered. I swear I wasn't trying to pry, but a notification popped up, an email from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. The subject line? Last night, heart. My stomach dropped. I clicked. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the mouse. The email was explicit. She thanked him for the unforgettable night, said she couldn't wait to feel his arms around her again. The sound of the shower still running gave me time. I opened more emails. There were dozens, weeks of correspondence. He had another relationship. No, worse, multiple. Different names, different threads, different cities. My Adam, the man who preached honesty like gospel, was running parallel lives. I remember sitting there staring at the screen, feeling like the floor beneath me had given out. My chest hurt so badly it was hard to breathe. When he came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, humming like nothing had happened, I almost screamed. Instead, I shut the laptop quietly and told him I had to leave. He looked puzzled, but didn't press. I didn't confront him then. I needed to think. I needed to plan. Because the one thing I knew for certain in that moment was this. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. The drive home that night is burned into my memory like a scar. Streetlights smeared into pale streaks through my tears, the steering wheel slick beneath my grip. The radio, cruelly indifferent, blasted some shallow pop anthem about love. And all I could think was, how long has this been going on? How long have I been the fool in his circus? When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on a single light. I just sat there, staring into the dark, scrolling through every text he'd ever sent me, every good night, every I miss you, every you're my forever. They all read differently now, like they were lines from a play he'd been rehearsing for years. The intimacy wasn't real. It was a performance, and I was just one of his unsuspecting audience members. I didn't sleep that night. I drafted a dozen furious texts, angry, pleading, demanding answers. But I deleted them all. He didn't deserve the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. By sunrise, the grief had hardened into something else, a dangerous kind of clarity. I decided to turn detective. I went through his social media, old photos, even backups he thought I didn't know about. The more I dug, the more the rot revealed itself. There were at least 3 women I could identify, scattered across different cities. Trips that were supposedly for work were rendezvous with them. He even used the same words, the same ridiculous phrases of devotion. You're safe with me, always.
My God, he was recycling lines of false intimacy like some budget theater actor. The worst part? Even with all this proof, part of me still wanted him. That's how insidious betrayal is. Love doesn't vanish the moment you find the knife in your back. It lingers like a phantom limb, making you doubt your own senses. But beneath that ache, something else was taking root. A plan. I wasn't going to storm into his apartment and scream. That would give him control. He'd twist it, manipulate me, make me the crazy girlfriend. No, I wasn't just going to leave him. I was going to ruin him. The opportunity came faster than I expected. His birthday was 2 weeks away, and he'd been planning a big dinner with friends, colleagues, even his parents. He wanted me there at his side, the loyal girlfriend, smiling in all the pictures. And I decided that would be the stage for his downfall. In the meantime, I played my role flawlessly. When he came over, I smiled, kissed him back, listened to his vague stories about long days at work. I pretended not to notice when he glanced at his phone with that secretive little smirk. He didn't know I'd already gathered everything I needed. Screenshots of the emails, printouts of flight confirmations, even a voice recording of one late-night call with a woman who giggled, "I can't believe she doesn't suspect a thing." I was building a case, not just for me, but for every woman he had strung along. On the night of his birthday dinner, I dressed carefully. I wanted to look calm, collected, radiant, a woman in control. I wore the necklace he'd given me for our 6-month anniversary, the one I now knew he'd bought in bulk, because I'd seen the exact same design in pictures on another woman's neck. At the restaurant, the air buzzed with laughter and chatter. His parents beamed, his friends clapped him on the back. He kissed my cheek in front of everyone, his hand resting possessively on my waist. He had no idea the ground beneath him was about to crack open. When the waiter brought out the cake and everyone sang, I stood up and raised my glass. The room quieted. "I just want to say a few words about Adam," I began, my voice steady, my heart pounding like a war drum. And that's when I began to tell the truth.
"I just want to say a few words about Adam," I repeated, smiling the way you smile at a sleeping snake. Glasses stilled, forks hovered. The sparkler candle hissed on the cake and lit his face. "Adam is generous," I said. "He remembers details. He buys flowers on Wednesdays just because. He says honesty is non-negotiable." I let the pause hang. "And he's very, very good at reusing lines." A polite laugh flickered. Adam's arm tightened around my waist. "Babe," he murmured, charm sharpening to warning. "Keep it short. My dad hates speeches." "Short and sweet," I said, and lifted the envelope beneath my chair. Inside were 10 thin manila folders, each labeled with a first name. I passed them to his parents, his boss, his closest friends. "Don't open them yet." I raised my glass. "To Adam," I said, then looked to the maitre d'. The bar lights dimmed and the projector flickered on. My laptop, already connected, woke to the slide I'd prepared. Adam's greatest hits. The first screenshot appeared. An email from 3 months ago. "You're safe with me, always." A photo followed. Adam's hand on a waist that wasn't mine, the same necklace glinting at another woman's throat. Gasps rolled around the room. His mother's hand rose to her mouth. "Turn that off," Adam said, still smiling out of habit. I clicked to the next slide. Flight confirmations. Hotel bookings that overlapped with nights he said he was catching up on projects. Messages choreographing alibis. "I'll tell her I'm on site late. Don't text after 10. She's a light sleeper." The smile slipped. "We can talk privately," he hissed. "Please." "Privately is where you did your worst work," I said. "We're doing this in the light." "Open yours," I told his father. Inside, dated bank statements showing cash withdrawals before every work trip. His father's eyes moved across the page, jaw tightening. His boss opened his. Emails from a company account during hours Adam billed to a client. "He expensed these stays?" he asked. "Under client relations?" A murmur thickened. Someone set a glass down too hard. The sparkler sputtered out. The fifth slide was a recording icon and a waveform. I pressed play. A woman's voice filled the room, laughing intimately. "I can't believe she doesn't suspect a thing." Then Adam, unmistakable. "People believe what they need. I just give them something pretty to hold." No one breathed. The restaurant's jazz turned obscene. He reached for the laptop. I closed it and laid my palm over the lid. "No." The word vibrated through me like a struck bell. "Here's my favorite part," I said, because my rage had teeth. "When he says he'd rather hear a hard truth than a comfortable lie." I nodded to the staff to separate checks. We were done pretending this was one celebration. And looked at Adam. He looked like a man discovering gravity the wrong way. "Get out," his father said, voice like a slam door. "Now. We'll speak tomorrow. Alone." Adam's mouth opened and closed. "Dad." "Now." He pushed back his chair, scraping a scream from the floor. He half turned to me. "We could have talked." "I did," I said. "For a year. I talked while you rehearsed.
I lifted my glass, steady, to hard truths. He left. The door swung behind him with a soft thud I felt in my ribs. Silence fractured. His mother cried, his friends stared at their plates, their phones, their hands. His boss murmured about invoices. I stood until the shaking started and the adrenaline drained, leaving me hollow and cold. I gathered my laptop and walked into the night. On the sidewalk, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. "Are you the girlfriend?" a woman asked. "That depends who's asking." She gave a name from one of the folders. Her voice broke. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear." "I believe you," I said. And the bell inside me settled. "Do you want to talk?" "Yes," she whispered. "There's something you should see."
Her voice shook like a wire in the wind, and yet there was urgency beneath it. "I don't want to say this over the phone. Can we meet?" Every part of me wanted to crawl into bed and disappear, but adrenaline still hummed under my skin. "Where?" I asked. She named a cafe 20 minutes away. I almost laughed at the irony. It was the same place Adam had first taken me on a casual Sunday coffee date. The place where I thought this could be something real. I got there before her, ordered tea I wouldn't drink, and sat by the window. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately from the photos I'd found. Long dark hair, sharp cheekbones, a sadness she hadn't earned. She scanned the room, spotted me, and hesitated. "You're," she started. "I am," I said. She slid into the booth, fingers tightening around her cup. "I thought I was his only one. He told me you were just an ex who couldn't let go, that you stalked him." The lie stung even though I expected it. "He said similar about you, that you were a coworker who wanted him, but he was shutting it down." Her laugh was bitter. "Of course." She pulled out her phone, opened a hidden album, and turned it toward me. Dozens of photos. Adam at her family's house, holding her nephew, decorating a Christmas tree. He'd told me he spent that Christmas volunteering at a shelter. Then a video. Adam in her apartment, shirtless, grinning, saying, "You're the only one who knows me." I felt bile rise. "How long?" I asked. "Almost 2 years," she said softly. "Longer than me." It hit like a physical blow. I wasn't even the main act. I was a side stage in his festival of lies. She bit her lip. "And there's more. He promised me he was filing for bankruptcy last year. Said he needed me to lend him money until he got back on his feet." My blood ran cold. "How much?" She looked down. 25,000. I gripped the table so hard my nails ached. He hadn't asked me for money, but I suddenly remembered small things. Me covering dinners, paying for vacations he reimbursed with suspicious delays. She whispered, "I think he's conning all of us." Something inside me snapped into alignment. This wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was fraud. Manipulation on a scale I hadn't let myself consider. I told her about the files, the slideshow, the dinner. She covered her mouth, tears sliding down. "Thank you," she said, "for exposing him." But I wasn't done. "Listen," I said, "if we work together, we can take this further. Legally, publicly. No more shadows." Her eyes searched mine, wary but fierce. Then she nodded. "I'm in." That night, back in my apartment, I made a new folder on my desktop. Adam, final. Into it, I dragged every screenshot, every recording, every piece of proof. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like the hunter. When I finally slept, I dreamed not of him, but of fire. Not wild and destructive, controlled flames, cleansing, burning rot to ash. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from unknown numbers, women I didn't know, all saying the same thing. I was with him too. Some found me through mutual friends, others through social media after hearing about the birthday dinner fiasco. The network grew, name after name, each with their own stories, their own scars. It was bigger than I had imagined. Adam wasn't just a cheater, he was a serial manipulator, weaving webs across cities, draining people of trust, money, years of their lives. And for the first time in months, I felt a strange, sharp clarity. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an army and a plan that was only just beginning.
The group chat formed almost overnight. One woman added another, who added 2 more, until there were 12 of us staring at our screens in disbelief. 12 women, all with overlapping timelines, all with the same recycled phrases, the same jewelry, the same hollow promises. The messages poured in fast, a kaleidoscope of rage and grief. "He said I was the only one. He borrowed money from me too. He met my parents. He promised marriage." It was horrifying, but also strangely comforting. Each news story dulled the sting of my own because it wasn't just me. It was all of us. I became the unofficial organizer. Maybe it was the files I'd already gathered, or maybe it was the fire in my chest that refused to die down. I started building a timeline, dates of his business trips, receipts, screenshots, a spreadsheet color-coded by victim and city. Every lie had a footprint, and I was determined to follow them all. The more we compared, the more patterns emerged. He wasn't just cheating for the thrill, he was profiting, borrowing money under fake pretenses, getting women to pay for trips, sometimes even using one woman's credit card for another woman's gifts, a grifter hiding behind a smile. That's when the idea shifted. This wasn't only revenge, this was justice. We decided to go public, but not recklessly. No angry Facebook rants that could be brushed off as crazy ex drama. We needed something undeniable, proof packaged so cleanly it couldn't be ignored. One of the women, Jenna, was a journalist. She said, if we present this right, we can not only expose him, but protect other people from becoming his next mark. We spent nights on video calls planning. Each woman shared her evidence, her story, her heartbreak. Tears turned into fury, fury into resolve. By the end of the week, Jenna had a draft article, The Double and Triple Lives of Adam R. It read like a crime report mixed with a Greek tragedy. Dates, names, redacted for privacy, financial records, screenshots. And woven through it all, the voices of women he'd gutted. It was devastating. But before we could publish, we wanted one final piece. His reaction, the raw, undeniable proof of who he was when the mask fell off. That part fell to me. I arranged to meet him, texted, sweet and casual. Can we talk? I think we owe it to ourselves. He agreed instantly. Of course he did. He still thought I was salvageable, that he could spin me back into orbit. We met at his apartment. He opened the door with that same practiced half smile, eyes scanning me for weakness. He said, I knew you'd come around, reaching to pull me into a hug. I stepped back. No. Sit down. His eyebrows lifted, but he sat. I set my phone recording, the screen dark in my hand. I said, I know about all of them. Every single one. The trips, the lies, the money. For a second, he froze. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. You don't understand. You think you've got the whole story, but you've been manipulated by jealous women. They'll say anything. I pressed. Named names, dates, places only he and the other women could know. His smile cracked, then vanished. The arrogance slipped into irritation. So what? I had options. Everyone does. You were just too fragile to handle it. There it was. The real him, stripped bare, callous, cruel. When I left that night, the recording safely saved, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I felt steady, like I was carrying a loaded weapon. Not of violence, but of truth. 2 days later, Jenna's article went live, and within hours, it exploded.
The article detonated like a bomb at dawn. By noon, it was everywhere. Shared on Twitter, reposted on Facebook, passed around office group chats. The headline alone was enough to hook people. The double and triple lives of Adam R. How one man manipulated a dozen women at once. The details were brutal. Jenna had done her job well. Every claim supported with receipts, screenshots, and the recordings. My voice was anonymized, but the words were unmistakable. Privately is where you did your worst work. We're doing this in the light. The world heard him admit that he saw us as fragile, as options. Comments flooded in. Some were predictable, people doubting, accusing us of exaggeration, but the sheer weight of evidence crushed most skepticism. Women started tagging friends. Isn't this the guy you matched with on Bumble? Didn't he go to your gym? One by one, more stories surfaced, small echoes that widened the crater beneath his carefully constructed life. Adam tried to fight back. He posted a long rant on Instagram about toxic exes conspiring against him, claiming it was all a smear campaign. But screenshots don't lie, and the angrier he got, the more unhinged he sounded. By the end of the week, he'd been suspended from his job pending investigation into the falsified client expenses. His father, a respected figure in their community, issued a statement distancing the family from his behavior and misconduct. His friends, silent, vanished. But the real storm wasn't public, it was personal. He started blowing up my phone with calls, texts, voicemails that swung from pleading to threatening. We can fix this. You don't know what you've done. Everyone lies sometimes. You've ruined my life, I'll ruin yours. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I forwarded everything to a lawyer one of the women knew. With the financial fraud evidence, there was enough for a civil suit, and maybe even criminal charges. The group chat became a lifeline. Every time one of us wavered, another stepped in with strength. When one woman confessed she still missed him, I told her, that's not love you're missing, that's the addiction he built. And I believed it, because I'd felt that same phantom ache too. The backlash against him grew, but so did the whispers towards us.
Strangers online dissected our stories like we were characters in a soap opera. Some called us brave, others said we should have known better. I learned quickly that public revenge has its price. You become part of the spectacle. But then came the email. A woman none of us had heard of before. She wrote that she'd been with Adam years ago, before any of us, and that she'd left when she discovered he'd stolen money from her parents' business. She never went to the police out of shame, but now she said, "I wish I had. Maybe it would have saved you all." Her words gutted me, because she was right. If one of us had spoken sooner, maybe the chain would have broken earlier. But that guilt quickly hardened into resolve. We weren't victims anymore. We were a coalition. That weekend, we filed the suit together, 12 signatures on one thick stack of papers, bound by anger, loss, and an odd, fierce sisterhood none of us had expected to find. As I walked out of the courthouse, the air felt different, sharper, cleaner. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't looking over my shoulder for the next lie to fall. Adam's life was unraveling, thread by thread, but mine was finally starting to stitch itself back together. And yet, I knew the real aftermath, the hardest part, was still to come.
Filing the lawsuit felt like striking a match in a dark room. Satisfying, but fleeting. The real fire came later, in the slow grind of the legal process. Lawyers dissected every message, every receipt, every whisper of fraud. Adam was served papers at his apartment, and though I wasn't there, one of the women who lived nearby told us he looked pale, almost sick, as he stood in the doorway clutching the envelope like a lifeline already slipping through his fingers. But victory wasn't immediate. The court moves like molasses. And while we waited, the emotional fallout began to unravel us in ways I hadn't anticipated. Nights were the worst. I'd wake up from dreams where he was apologizing, begging, convincing, and my stupid heart would lurch, forgetting for a split second who he really was. Then the truth would rush back like cold water, and I'd lie awake, furious at myself for still carrying his ghost. The group chat became both therapy and confession booth. We shared updates from our lawyers, screenshots of his failed attempts to contact us, and sometimes just grief. One woman admitted she'd started therapy after realizing Adam wasn't her first manipulator. He was part of a pattern. Another confessed she was drowning in debt from the money she'd given him, ashamed of her own blindness. As for me, I threw myself into work. Extra hours, new projects, anything to keep from spiraling into the endless loop of what-ifs. What if I'd trusted my gut sooner? What if I'd never opened his laptop that night? Would ignorance have been easier? Or was it always better to face the wound, even if it meant bleeding? Meanwhile, Adam's life crumbled in public. The article stayed viral for weeks, and every time he tried to defend himself online, he was drowned out by screenshots and receipts. His job was gone for good, his boss confirmed that client funds had been misused, friends cut ties, even his own family stopped shielding him. But he didn't disappear, he lurked. Anonymous accounts harassed us online, accusing us of lying, of exaggerating. Some of the women got late-night phone calls with silence on the other end. Once, I came home to find a note slid under my door. "You'll regret this." I took it straight to the police. Maybe they couldn't do much, but I wanted it on record. Fear tried to worm its way into my chest, but I refused to give him that power again. Still, I couldn't pretend the aftermath was clean. There were nights I hated myself for still missing him, for craving the version of him I'd fallen for, the man who brought coffee to my office, who listened so intently, who swore I was safe with him. I had to remind myself again and again that man never existed. He was an illusion crafted by a con artist. Therapy helped. Slowly, I began to peel apart the truth from the lie, to see how carefully he had studied my vulnerabilities and mirrored back exactly what I wanted to hear. Realizing it wasn't weakness that made me fall for him, it was humanity, was the first step towards forgiveness. Not for him, for myself. Months passed, court dates loomed, and one by one, the women who'd once whispered in shame began to stand taller. We weren't just victims anymore, we were witnesses. We were survivors. But survival isn't the end of the story. Because one day, my lawyer called with news that changed everything. He wants to settle. When my lawyer said the word settle, I almost laughed. Adam, the man who strutted through lies like they were marble hallways, was now cornered enough to negotiate. Part of me wanted to refuse on the spot, drag him through every public hearing, let the world watch him squirm. But my lawyer was practical. If we settle, you all get compensation faster. Trials can take years. He's bleeding already. Sometimes justice is best taken swiftly. The group chat lit up. Opinions split. Some wanted his money. Some wanted the satisfaction of seeing him rot in court. One woman wrote, "He stole 2 years of my life. There isn't a dollar amount for that." Another countered, "Then let's make him pay every cent he conned out of us, plus more. Take his resources so he can't hurt anyone else." In the end, we agreed to hear his offer. The mediation room was sterile, humming with fluorescent lights.
He was there, flanked by his attorney, looking smaller than I remembered. Not physically. He was still tall, broad-shouldered, but diminished, like arrogance had been sanded off. His eyes darted away the moment they met mine. The terms slid across the table. A lump sum payout divided among us. No admission of guilt, but no denial either. His lawyer framed it as a step toward closure for all parties. Closure. The word tasted like ash. I leaned forward. You'll pay every cent you owe, plus interest, and you'll issue a public apology. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Adam finally spoke, voice low. I'm not writing an apology that makes me look like a monster. You don't have to write it. I already have the draft. All you have to do is sign. From my folder, I slid a sheet across. It was concise. I manipulated, lied, and defrauded women who trusted me. My actions caused harm I can never undo. I am sorry. He read it, jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he'd refuse. But then he looked around the room, 12 pairs of eyes boring into him, unflinching, and something cracked. He signed. The settlement money wasn't life-changing, but it was validating. Some women used it to pay off debts he'd saddled them with. Others donated part of it to women's shelters. I tucked mine away in savings, a strange kind of blood money that I refused to waste. But the apology, that was the real victory. When it went live, posted to his once curated social media accounts, it spread just as fast as the original article. No excuses, no gaslighting, just confession. The internet devoured it. Whatever tattered reputation he clung to disintegrated overnight. For weeks afterward, I felt lighter, freer. I walked through the world without glancing over my shoulder, without flinching at the buzz of my phone. And yet freedom carried its own weight. Revenge doesn't hand you peace neatly wrapped. It leaves behind silence, the kind that makes you face yourself. Therapy sessions turned from what he did to why I stayed. I learned how predators like him thrive, not because their victims are foolish, but because they are empathetic, because we see the good even when it's a mask, because we want to believe. It hurt to admit how much of myself I'd lost in him, but it also healed me to realize I could rebuild. Piece by jagged piece, I was becoming someone stronger, not harder, but sharper. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that Adam had moved away, cut off from family and friends, starting over somewhere no one knew his name. Maybe he thought he'd reinvent himself. Maybe he would. But wherever he went, the internet never forgets. His apology, his downfall. It all followed him like a shadow he could never outrun. And me, I didn't need to chase him anymore. He was gone from my orbit, stripped of his power. But the story wasn't just his. It was ours. The women he thought he could scatter and silence. We had found each other in the wreckage, and in a strange, poetic twist, he had built us a sisterhood without meaning to. And that sisterhood was the one thing he could never destroy.
Life after Adam was quieter, but not simple. Once the chaos settled, the article, the lawsuit, the settlement, the apology, I found myself staring into the empty spaces he used to fill. No buzzing phone with constant check-ins, no dinner plans wrapped in half-truths, no anxious waiting for him to come home late. For weeks, I didn't know what to do with all that silence. At first, I threw myself into distractions. I redecorated my apartment, started running again, even took a pottery class on a whim. But grief has a way of sneaking in during the quiet moments, when you're folding laundry or waiting for pasta to boil. I'd catch myself remembering his laugh or the way he'd tuck hair behind my ear, and my chest would ache before I could remind myself it was all performance. He wasn't laughing with me. He was laughing at how much I believed him. Therapy became my anchor. My therapist said something that stuck. You don't miss him. You miss the version of yourself you got to be when you thought he was real. That cracked something open inside me. Because she was right. I missed the safety, the hope, the way I'd let my guard down. It wasn't him I wanted back. It was me. So I started the slow work of finding myself again. I set boundaries with friends. I learned to enjoy being alone without feeling lonely. And I stopped apologizing for needing time to heal. Some days I felt strong, other days brittle, but I reminded myself healing isn't linear. The other women stayed in my life. What began as a trauma-bonded group chat grew into real friendship. We celebrated birthdays together, shared job updates, even joked about starting a podcast. There was something profoundly healing about laughing with women who knew exactly the shape of my scars. He had tried to isolate us, but in the end, he'd given us each other. Every so often, his name popped up again online. Usually someone new who stumbled across the article and tweeted in shock. The ripples never fully stopped. Once, I even got a message from a woman who said she'd matched with him on a dating app, but Googled him first. She wrote, "Thank you.
You saved me. I sat staring at that message for a long time, tears in my eyes, realizing that our story, as messy and painful as it was, had become a warning flare for others. And yet, part of me still wrestled with anger. Not at him, he was a void, but at myself, for ignoring the red flags, for loving someone who never existed, for wasting precious years. That anger took time to soften, but eventually I could see it for what it was. Evidence of how much I cared, how much I trusted. Those weren't weaknesses, they were strengths he exploited. The final turning point came one rainy evening when I passed the restaurant where his birthday dinner had imploded. For a second, I froze, memories rushing back, the cake, the projector, the stunned silence. But instead of dread, I felt something different. Pride. That was the night I stopped being his victim. That was the night I chose the light over the shadows. I walked past with my head high, rain slicking the pavement, and realized I was free. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the quiet certainty that his story no longer defined mine. Adam's legacy was ashes. Mine was just beginning to take shape.
It's been over a year now since Adam's name last crossed my lips in anything other than a story told for caution. Time has stretched and softened the sharpest edges, but the scars remain, woven into me like threads I no longer try to hide. The lawsuit ended with him paying what he could, though money was never the real prize. The real victory was watching him stripped of his illusion of control. His apology, cold, begrudging, but public, still lives online. Whenever I stumble across it, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel distance, like looking at an old photograph of someone I used to know but can't remember loving. The women and I still keep in touch. What started as a support group has become a strange kind of sisterhood. We gather a few times a year, not to talk about him, but to celebrate the lives we've rebuilt. Weddings, promotions, babies. Each milestone feels like a collective triumph, proof that despite the damage he left behind, none of us stayed broken. People sometimes ask if revenge gave me closure. The truth is complicated. Revenge is fire. It blazes hot, consumes quickly, and leaves behind smoke. It gave me justice, yes. It gave me power when I felt powerless. But closure? That came later, in the quiet work of forgiving myself. I've learned to see red flags not as failures of my past, but as guides for my future. I no longer flinch when someone leaves their phone face down on the table. Instead, I trust myself to ask questions, to demand transparency, to walk away if something feels wrong. I'm not paranoid, I'm prepared. Most of all, I've learned that love is not about grand gestures or borrowed words. It's about consistency, integrity, the kind of honesty that doesn't need to be declared because it's woven into every action. Someday, I might find that again. And if I don't, I know now that I'm enough on my own. Sometimes I wonder what became of Adam, whether he tried to rebuild elsewhere, if he still spins his webs. But then I remind myself, it doesn't matter. His story stopped mattering the moment I chose to step out of it. My story is not about the man who betrayed me. It's about the woman who refused to stay broken. And if there's one lesson I carry with me, it's this. Betrayal is not the end. It's the fire that forges you into something stronger, sharper, and unshakably yours. So here I stand, not as his victim, not even as his survivor, but as myself, whole, unafraid, and finally free.
Another story ends, but there are always more. Subscribe and stay tuned.